What if the world's most important waterway, the one that carries 20% of the globe's oil supply, was suddenly shut down by the United States Navy? That's not a hypothetical anymore. That is happening right now. President Trump has just announced a full naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Talks with Iran have collapsed, and in the next 5 minutes, you are going to understand exactly what this means. Not just for the Middle East, but for your fuel prices, your stock portfolio, and the global economy. Let's break this down like an intelligence analyst, because this is not just a military story. This is a money story. And the people who understand it first will be the ones who are prepared. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow stretch of water, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, sitting between Iran and Oman. Every single day, roughly 17 to 21 million barrels of oil pass through that corridor. That is approximately one-fifth of the entire world's daily oil consumption. Saudi Arabian oil, Emirati oil, Kuwaiti oil, Iraqi oil. All of it funnels through this single choke point. Now imagine that choke point controlled by the United States Navy, with guns pointed both ways. This did not happen overnight. For months, back-channel negotiations between Washington and Tehran were inching forward. There were quiet diplomatic signals, secret meetings in Oman, and cautious optimism in the halls of power. But something broke. Intelligence sources suggest that Iran's refusal to halt uranium enrichment beyond the 60% threshold, dangerously close to weapons grade, was the final trigger. Trump received the briefing, called it a betrayal, and within 48 hours, the order was signed. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group has repositioned into the Gulf of Oman. 3 additional destroyers have moved to flanking positions. The message is unmistakable. The strait is now under American operational control. Now here is where the money begins to bleed. Within hours of the announcement, Brent crude spiked past $110 a barrel. That is a level not seen since the peak of the Ukraine war energy crisis. Oil traders on the floor of the New York Mercantile Exchange described the opening bell as controlled chaos. Hedge funds that had been quietly building long positions on energy for weeks, positions that now look like insider knowledge, were sitting on billions in overnight gains. Someone always knows first. That is the hidden financial reality of geopolitical conflict. But the pain reaches far beyond Wall Street. Every dollar added to the price of a barrel of oil translates directly into higher fuel costs, higher shipping costs, and higher food prices. Analysts at Goldman Sachs are already projecting that if this blockade holds for 30 days, average pump prices across the United States could climb by 40 to 60 cents per gallon. In the UK, petrol prices, already under pressure, are expected to surge past 160 pence per liter. Household budgets in Europe, already strained from years of inflation, are about to face another brutal squeeze. China is watching this more closely than anyone. Beijing imports more than 40% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. A prolonged blockade does not just hurt China's economy, it threatens the entire Belt and Road industrial supply chain. Chinese state media has already issued warnings calling the blockade a violation of international maritime law. The People's Liberation Army Navy has quietly repositioned 2 vessels in the Arabian Sea. This is not just America versus Iran. This is the beginning of a much larger strategic confrontation. Russia, meanwhile, is calculating its gains. With Middle Eastern oil disrupted, Russian crude, already flowing quietly to India, China, and parts of Southeast Asia through shadow fleet tankers, becomes even more valuable. Moscow does not need to fire a single missile to benefit from this crisis. It simply needs to wait and collect. The war economy always has winners in the shadows. Iran's response has been fierce in language, but cautious in action, for now. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has placed its naval assets in the Persian Gulf on high alert. Iran has threatened to activate its asymmetric warfare capabilities, swarm drone attacks, limpet mines on commercial vessels, and proxy strikes through Hezbollah and Houthi networks in Yemen. This is the playbook Tehran has rehearsed for decades, and the world knows they are capable of executing it. The question every intelligence desk is asking right now is not whether Iran will retaliate. It is when and at what scale. A single strike on a Saudi oil facility, a tanker disabled in the Gulf, a coordinated Houthi missile barrage on Riyadh, any one of those events could push oil past 130, even $150 a barrel. At that level, we are not talking about inconvenience. We are talking about recession-level economic damage for importing nations. There is also a dimension to this story that mainstream coverage will miss entirely. Defense contractors across the United States and United Kingdom are quietly experiencing what the financial community calls a conflict premium. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, BAE Systems, their order books are filling up. Military spending always accelerates in moments like this. The same governments telling their citizens to brace for higher fuel costs are simultaneously approving billion-dollar munitions contracts. War is a transfer of wealth, and knowing which direction that wealth flows is how you stay ahead. Here is the future scenario that should concern you most. If this blockade extends beyond 60 days without a diplomatic resolution, the global energy architecture begins to fracture. Gulf Cooperation Council nations, dependent on oil revenue for their sovereign wealth funds, will face severe fiscal pressure. Emergency OPEC meetings will fail to produce consensus. Alternative shipping routes around the Cape of Good Hope will add 15 to 20 days and hundreds of millions in additional freight costs to every major shipment. Insurance premiums for commercial vessels in the region are already climbing toward war risk territory. And then there is the nuclear dimension. Iran's supreme leader has publicly stated that the blockade constitutes an act of war. If Trump escalates further, airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, which military planners have had on the shelf for years, the region enters a new phase entirely. We are not there yet, but the architecture for that escalation is already in place. What you are witnessing right now is not just a military standoff, it is the collision of three forces: American strategic dominance, Iranian survival instinct, and Chinese economic vulnerability, happening simultaneously in one of the smallest stretches of water on the map. The ripple effects will touch every market, every fuel pump, every shipping lane, and every defense budget on the planet. If you are not tracking this story every single day, you are already behind. This channel exists precisely for moments like this, to cut through the noise, follow the money, and tell you what the mainstream headlines refuse to explain. If that is the intelligence you want, subscribe to WarFinex right now and hit the notification bell, because the next video is going to break down exactly which nations, assets, and sectors stand to gain, and which ones are about to collapse if this blockade becomes a full-scale war.